All right, let's get into another awesome wide receiver. But this is
yeah.
now what you would call, in the guide, this is now tier 3 for you. This is your remaining RB1s and wide receiver ones. And you kick this tier off with A.J. Brown.
Yeah, if you're sitting there, picks 9 through 12, I have 2 running backs, 2 receivers to consider through these next few guys. But the top for me is 100% A.J. Brown. If somebody from down on this ended up being in the top 5 overall this year, I think it could be A.J. Brown for sure. He's been the wide receiver 5 in PPR leagues back-to-back seasons, notching 144, 157 targets in that alpha role since joining the Eagles here. But it's similar to those, again, we talked about, like, he was really good last year. And wide receiver 5 is phenomenal. But just like Hill and Lamb we talked about earlier, there's actually some things that are saying, like, man, he could have been even better. If you're watching with us live here, you see these splits up here on the screen. For the first 9 weeks of the year, he was going ballistic, averaging 22.6 points per game over those first games. He was the wide receiver 2 in fantasy. Only Tyreek Hill was outscoring him. He was on pace for 172 targets, 126 catches, 1,898 yards, and 11 touchdowns. That's 384 points. That is bananas. And again, 67% of those were top 12. 89% of those were in the top 24 wide receivers. You were just always getting something good, and it was sometimes week-winning good from A.J. Brown. And then it's tough to pinpoint. That's what kind of makes me a little nervous, is it's like, what happened to these guys? Everybody saw the Eagles collapse. I think a lot of it was Nick Sirianni. They imploded as a team, and it was kind of the reverse of CeeDee Lamb, where CeeDee Lamb started slow but then blew up. Unfortunately, the opposite happened for A.J. Brown, and he was the wide receiver 37, 11.26 fantasy points per game across his last 8. And it's just, okay, which one am I going to get this year? I think you're definitely going to get closer to the guy we've seen his whole career. That's the first 9 games of the season. And I do think Kellen Moore opens up the ceiling even more potentially for A.J. Brown this year. And I know Moore wasn't great last year at the Chargers. That was a big argument. We're like, oh, we love Justin Herbert. We're going to really enjoy it. He wasn't great, no. But Keenan Allen was an absolute animal for anybody that drafted him. Wide receiver 3 in fantasy points per game, led the NFL with 11.7 targets per game. The year before, CeeDee Lamb leapt from the wide receiver 19 to the wide receiver 5 under Moore's tutelage. The thing that he does as good as anybody is he uses motion, and especially uses motion to get his wide receivers into the slot and into advantageous situation. Now, there is some rumblings that could be more Devonta Smith than A.J. Brown, but A.J. Brown leads the NFL in yards after catch per reception, whatever metric you want to look at. And if you just want to use your eyeballs, the guy is just the most dominant guy with the ball in his hand. So I imagine that Kellen Moore is definitely going to be scheming a lot of those run and catch beautiful opportunities we saw Keenan Allen and Lamb getting. And dare I say that maybe A.J. Brown is even better after the catch than CeeDee Lamb? Certainly better than Keenan Allen, in my opinion. CeeDee Lamb's great too, but like A.J. Brown is just like a truck when the ball is in his hand. So
he's such a bully.
He's a bully. It's a great way to put it. And I just think, with that layup usage, it might go to Devonta Smith. I think they're going to scheme both those guys up to get them plenty of slot time. And either way, I just think A.J. Brown, the track record, the history, he's, Jalen Hurts' boy. So I'm all about it. I think A.J. Brown, after those big 8, the first 8 are off the board, you got to get him at 9. And if he somehow, I've seen him fall to 11, 12, like people want to kind of overprice the running backs and get Taylor up there, get Barkley in there. I understand the scarcity of the position, but you're looking at a wide receiver that could be the number 1 guy. Really the only other guy I think I can say that about, maybe Garrett Wilson, who we're going to talk about in a little bit too. But I got to go with the consistency of A.J. Brown and the ceiling that you got here.
A.J. Brown's definitely my next wide receiver on the board. I definitely like him more than Garrett Wilson. However, full disclosure, I may like number 10 on your list more than A.J. Brown. I really, really, really like this guy.
I do too. He's juicy, huh? Jahmyr Gibbs. Why don't we dive into it? My running back 4 here. And the thing is, though, you have him at 10 or maybe even 9. He's going right now in the early 2nd right now in ESPN.
I know.
And Yahoo. So I wanted to show you guys where I value him. If I had the 10th pick, I would take him there because I don't want to risk him not coming back to me in round 2. But man, at the turn of draft right now, you're able to get Jahmyr Gibbs, and he is so tantalizing. My goodness, how good this guy is. Again, one of those guys, if he had eyeballs, like you just saw.
That's my whole argument for him. You've got all this great these great stats and stuff. My whole argument is I watched the guy play, and I was just like, I want that guy on my team.
He's electric.
I had Montgomery for a big stretch of that year, and man, every time I saw Gibbs touch the ball, I was like, kind of wish I had him.
Exactly. You got to think the Lions might start thinking the same way too. He was only 22nd in total opportunities, 28th in carries last year, but was still the 8th running back in fantasy points per game on the season. And another one of those ones where if you had Gibbs last year, you remember the start of the season was ugly. Like they were feeding Montgomery. You had Montgomery, so you saw the opposite end of things. 30 carries from Montgomery, 2 touchdowns from Montgomery. And ultimately, he really didn't do much in weeks 1 through 4. Just the running back, 28 in fantasy in weeks 1 through 4, suffered an injury in weeks 5 and 6. And then he comes back and he's the running back 3 in points per game for the rest of the season. He had 24 half PPR, 24, how many did he have there? 24 points per game in nearly half of his games, which is absolutely insane. You look at it too, again, in this timeshare with that type of workload, he tied Kyren Williams, Breece Hall for second in top 5 total weekly finishes. So we know the ceiling is there. And to me, this is like the definition of one that's like, he can only go up from here. The usage can't get much worse. They're not going to feed Montgomery more after seeing what they had with Jahmyr Gibbs last year. So even if it stayed the same and you got this guy, okay, I'll take the running back 3 in points per game over the second half of the year. And I know the touchdown upside is capped. And I know a couple of those games too. I don't want to be a pure cherry picker. 2 of those games did have Montgomery out of the lineup. So 2 of those games were his best of the season. Or actually, one of them was not. Only one of them was his second best. So he did have one of his best games with Montgomery. That all being said, though, Montgomery has missed 2, 4, 1, and 3 games across all of the last season. So it seems very likely you're going to get at least 1 to 2 to maybe 3. And God forbid if something happened to Montgomery where he's knocked out for the year, we're talking about if you took Montgomery out, I would probably. I was going to say running back 2. I still think that's probably Breece for me, but I would probably have Gibbs over Bijan if there was no Montgomery.
I would too if you took Montgomery out. And I feel bad. I feel like I'm kind of hating on Montgomery. I think he's awesome. Really,
especially NFL wise, like pound you, make you
NFL
submit, touchdowns. And he's good in fantasy. He's fine. He's a good RB2. Like I'll draft Montgomery where he goes too. But yeah, Gibbs is just the electric factory. It's just so wild. That his role should only increase given they've hyped him up as a special weapon. The GM compared him to CMC and Marshall Faulk when he drafted him. Yeah. And so far in the spring, he's practicing with Amon-Ra St. Brown at wide receiver. They're moving him out. They had plans for him to maybe be their slot receiver, even with Montgomery on the field is the talk. Like nobody's really stepping up at wide receiver 3 right now. So they're talking about maybe making Gibbs like a permanent slot receiver that then moves into the backfield plenty as well. This is the best line in football, number 1 on Pro Football Focus, number 1 wherever you look. So you're going to get a good offensive environment as well. Detroit's implied for the 2nd most total points in the league, and their game environments are by far the most high projected because their defense isn't that great. So you're just getting shootout after shootout. It's going to be a great season for Detroit players. We love Amon-Ra St. Brown. I love Jahmyr Gibbs. I think, the fact that you can get him sometimes in round 2 blows my mind. But after A.J. Brown, you said you might take him ahead of A.J. Brown.
Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe A.J. Brown is the pick there. But just regardless of whether I would take Brown or Gibbs first, I mean, I understand the potential shortcomings of Gibbs, but I really like him. And I mean, I would love to have him on my squad. And if I had the 10th pick in a redraft league and he's on the board, I've seen who you have 11, 12, 13, 14. I would definitely take him above those guys, which I know is not necessarily the common thinking, but I love it.
And I don't think you're wrong though. I really don't. I have him at 10. And like you said, if you wanted to go him over AJ Brown, Brown is so tantalizing too that
Brown's pretty awesome.
But man, because running backs are so scarce right now that I think it's justifiable. My running back 4, you can go him. He's going after Taylor. He's going after Barkley. And I would rather have Gibbs.
I would really rather have him than either of those guys. Yeah. And I'd rather have him than the guy you're about to lay out, which is your last wide receiver in your first round. You get 2 Jets. 2 Jets in the top 12, huh?
It feels so hideous, but then it makes you reflect. Aaron Rodgers' offenses, they've always been so concentrated. The running backs have been really good, and usually one, sometimes two. He's had a couple of years with like 3 really good receivers too, but it's always like that number 1 receiver, whether it's Jordy Nelson, Greg Jennings, Randall Cobb, like Devontae Adams, of course, has that career with him. And I think Garrett Wilson has as much talent as any of those guys, if not more than pretty much all of them, other than Devontae Adams.
Maybe not Adams.
Maybe not Adams, but he is just that good. He is truly dominant. And when the fact that Aaron Rodgers, anytime a receiver has seen 140 targets from him, they've never finished lower than the wide receiver 4. And I just look at that and I see the Jets target totem pole. Okay. What's in his way from 140, if not 170 targets from Aaron Rodgers this year? Alan Lazard, give me a break. Like, yeah, I like, Malachi Corley is going to be a fun little gadget player, but there is nothing stopping him. Tyler Conklin, a nice tight end sleeper, sure. He's going to get 150 to 170 looks here from Aaron Rodgers, assuming Rodgers is healthy. But anything you want to measure wide receiver talent, if you just can't look at the guy and see how damn good he is, 5th in ESPN's open score, 9th in target share, 1st in air yard share. Like, he is just a target dominator, and he is finally going to get that volume from a good player. The graphic we have up here is just his splits with and without Zach Wilson, and they got a little better. Like, Zach Wilson took a minor step forward last year, very, very minor. So he closed his gap.
A minor step forward. That's
very minor step. Because entering last year, it was even wider. It was like 8 points and 19-point difference. He closed the gap, but it still goes to show 15 points per game anytime anyone other than Zach Wilson was throwing him the ball. And what makes that tricky too is like when it was Mike White, who's not that good, but like Mike White, he was averaging 20 points per game with Mike White. Last year he had to deal with Tim Boyle, and that's kind of bringing down these splits that Zach Wilson was actually better than the garbage he had to play with. So it goes to show you, like, I should have actually put up just the splits with like Mike White, who's not even an NFL quarterback, and Joe Flacco, right? And Joe Flacco, he averaged 22 points per game with Joe Flacco. So you're telling me that Garrett Wilson can't get it done with Aaron Rodgers? If somebody from these end of the first round just like had 180 targets, and last year, remember, CeeDee Lamb was going in this range. I do have, again, at 11, so clearly there's a risk of Rodgers getting hurt. There's the risk of the Jets defense just being so damn good that they don't even have to throw the ball, right? So there's risk here. But ultimately, I think Garrett Wilson, once you get down to this next bottom half of the first round, I did have Puka above him, and we're going to talk about, of course, why that's changed over the latest news. But Garrett Wilson's a great end of first round pick. I love starting with like a running back and a receiver, balance out my team with 2 anchors at the 2, positions. You got to start multiple ones. And Garrett Wilson's a great surefire bet to anchor to.
And your philosophy has changed on that. I've gotten to see your approach change over the course of 8 years, like we've talked about, and it's been interesting. You've evolved. You got to evolve or you die in this business.
The league's evolved, and the Wolf has had to evolve with it. But we always were running back. If you ask any questions about it, then you get sent to detention. Like you have to go to running backs, and you still can. I'm not saying that's not a valid strategy, but it definitely has changed. There's no doubt about it. I am far more open and flexible. Wait on quarterbacks. Now I'm all about elite quarterbacks. It's things change. So yeah, you got to evolve with the times, or else you get left behind. And I think in 2022, I tried to stay to my, you wait on QBs, you have to take 2 running backs, and it was the worst year to do either of those things, and it just kind of punched me in the face. And then last year, I adjusted with the times and had one of my best fantasy seasons I've ever had. So I'm feeling really good about coming into the year with this more flexible. If you guys get the guide, you'll see it. I call it the jellyfish mindset. It's just a weird way to frame it, but if you just kind of go with the flow of your draft and pick up what you need, the guide will explain all about that. You jellyfish around.
Also, I feel like jellyfish can't die or something. Like they could live potentially thousands of years. So you got that going for you too. I love your case on Garrett Wilson. I definitely agree with that. I mean, obviously I'm always a tiny bit suspicious of Aaron Rodgers these days, but we'll see what happens. Your case is a good one. Like I said, I had completely forgotten that Joe Flacco played for this team. You brought that up. And he was all right.
Like pass attempts too when he was with the Jets. Like he just came and it was YOLO Joe. Yep. As he did with the Browns last year. I love Joe Flacco when he gets in there and just.
I kind of sneaky love Joe Flacco also. It's not like I just think he's amazing, but I respect the craft. The guy just goes out there. He probably hadn't played football in like a couple of years and just goes and slings it. And, sometimes it works.
It does.
Real quick, Jonathan Taylor, your last pick in the draft. I will be right back. You start this one. I'll be back in like 30 seconds.
Absolutely. Let's talk about Taylor wrapping up round one, and then we'll hit a couple guys that were just off the cuff, and then, of course, all the questions that you guys have. We talked about the hero running back strategy with some of those early guys, the Breeses, the Bijans, the CMCs, the guys that you truly need to have that legendary ceiling. And who better to also lump into that potential hero running back conversation than a guy that's just 2 seasons removing from the clear running back one, 2,171 yards from scrimmage, 20 touchdowns, 384 opportunities that year. We've seen it with Jonathan Taylor. We know it exists, and why can't it exist in this offense? Shane Steichen, I was very impressed with him as a play caller. The Colts were, with a few games with Anthony Richardson, first in pace, first in no huddle rate, third in average play clock seconds, first in combined plays run, 7th in combined points. They were in shootouts. They were in games with tons of plays happening. And obviously the more plays, the more fantasy points that are up for grabs there. Now, I know the Anthony Richardson argument, though. This guy is 255 pounds, a goal line hammer potentially like Cam Newton. He had 4 rushing touchdowns in just about 2.5 games. So that will be the absolute floor play is if he just comes in and Richardson is dominating goal line looks, then yeah, Taylor's not going to pay off a first-round price. But you think about the fact that he got hurt, Richardson, on 2 designed runs. And if he's, is the team, the franchise potential quarterback, they really want to get an evaluation of this guy, are they going to leave him up to that many hits? I know Shane Steichen said, you don't tell Steph Curry to not shoot threes. We're not going to tell Richardson to not run. Like that's a huge part of his game. That's why he's such an exciting fantasy quarterback as well. But especially when you get to the goal line where it's like, do we really need this guy taking those high contact hits? Or we have an absolute battering ram in Jonathan Taylor, who has a 20 touchdown season on his resume. Let's at least give him the first couple cracks at it. That's how I see this team playing it. It is going to, both their ceilings are kind of dependent on how these rushing touchdowns, Richardson and Taylor, how they shake out. And to me, I think the team is going to give Taylor more of those cracks, at least on the early downs. And I think he's going to convert. And you just look at what he did last year. I know he was hurt. I know he was dinged up. But from week 7 onward, when he finally was back in the lineup and had his legs under him, running back 3 in fantasy, 16.8 points per game. He was top 12 in 56% of his games. And if you look at what Moss did and JT did, and I know that's not a perfect science. You can't just be like, all right, Moss's points, JT's point, let's combine them together. And that's what you're going to get from the Colts running back. But it does illustrate how valuable this team in this backfield was over the course of the season when you had their starter. 268 points, which have been running back 2 on the season in total points there. They have the sneaky 3rd highest ranked line by Pro Football Focus, one of the top tackle duos in the league. Got Ryan Kelly, a beast at center. So a great line, a good play caller, a fast-paced offense. It does, again, come down to how do those rushing touchdowns shake out at the goal line. Is it Richardson, this potential monster? Is it JT? And obviously, as a first-rounder, I'm thinking they don't want to leave Richardson up to those big, heavy hits at the goal line, at least if they don't have to. Let's give JT the first couple cracks. He's a 20-touchdown scorer before. He really has that upside to do it again. Frank Gore, a friend of the show, good guy.
He is a friend of the show.
He just predicted that in this offense, what he's seen, that Jonathan Taylor is going to run for 2,000 yards this year. So take what that you want, but Frank Gore is a man, a wise man, somebody I respect. And so Frank Gore thinks he can have 2,000 yards, and that upside's even potentially there. With this line, and who else are they going to give carries to? Trey Sermon is the backup. I mean, come on. There is no, as long as Taylor's healthy, he's going to get 25 carries a game in a great system with a great line. I've really warmed up to him throughout this offseason, and I could definitely see him getting back to that, like, damn, you didn't have Taylor, you didn't do really well in fantasy type of year. What is up, you fantasy wolf? Thanks so much for tuning in. If you haven't already, share your thoughts in the comments, check out some more videos, and join the newest Wolfpack by subscribing below.